أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على المصطفى محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم، واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. In our last lesson, we were speaking about the events that took place before the holy wedding, the wedding of Imam Ali alayhi salam and Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhima. And we completed the narration of Salama rahmatullah ta'ala alayha salamullah alayha. We read the full narration, and we mentioned that one of the interesting parts in that narration is that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa tells his women, his wives, to prepare Sayyidah Zahra alayhi salam for the wedding, which led us to saying that from an Islamic perspective, it is not unlawful, rather it is lawful for a lady to look beautiful during her wedding. That's fine. But she is required of doing what? She is required of concealing that beauty from the sight of non-mahram men. So during the wedding, she's allowed to wear nice clothing, fancy clothing, to look, beautiful for her husband and for the women who are present. But she has to conceal that beauty from the sight of who? From the sight of non-mahram men. So this is an issue that has to stay in mind. This doesn't only apply to weddings, it applies to any case. A lady is allowed to look beautiful. That's fine, right? She's allowed to wear fancy clothing, she's allowed to wear makeup, but not in front of who? Not in front of non-mahrams. So her zina has to be concealed when non-mahram men are able to see her. Jayid. So if she's walking in the street or she's in her workplace and non-mahram men are present or could be present at any time, she's in school, for example, or other settings where a non-mahram individual might see that lady, she has to do what? She has to conceal her zina. Now, when we say zina, what are we talking about exactly? Last week, or actually the week before, we mentioned a few points, but today I want to mention it with more clarity. We're talking about, number one, her body. Her body is considered to be what? Zina. In the narrations of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam, they consider the female body to be what? Zina. Subhanallah. Because Allah Ta'ala gave them what? Gave them beauty, or say extra beauty. And this is something that Muslims and non-Muslims both understand. Even non-Muslims understand this issue, know this issue. So Allah Ta'ala commands women to do what? To cover their bodies from top to bottom, excluding the face and the hands. We did say, if you remember, that there are some maraja who say that even the hands and the face of the lady should be covered. حسين إذا ممكن بس ترد لي الباب شوي. جزاك الله خيرا. But a good amount of maraja these days tell you that they're supposed to cover their bodies from top to bottom, but they're allowed to uncover their faces and their hands. So that's one form of zina that should be concealed from the sight of who? Of non-mahram men. Secondly, their ornaments. The ornaments that women wear should also be concealed. So If, for example, a lady is wearing a necklace, that necklace has to be concealed from the sight of the non-mahram. Yes, Sayyid al-Sistani mentions some details regarding what? Regarding the ring and the bracelet. Jayyid, regarding the ring and the bracelet, and also regarding what we call kuhul. But I don't want to get into these details right now because we're not, in jurisprudence class. But if you'd like, check the Q&A section of sistani.org. You'll see certain details regarding these specific forms of these specific types of ornaments: the rings, the bracelets, and also what we call kuhul. Imagine if a lady, for example, is wearing earrings, and ladies usually do wear earrings, and the earrings are sticking out of her hijab. Jayyid, would that be lawful? It wouldn't. She has to conceal the earrings. Jayyid, you might see sometimes certain sisters who wear the hijab, but the earrings are out of the hijab. That does not work. That's an ornament. It's a form of zina or a type of zina, and it has to be concealed as well. So the second type form of zina that should be concealed are what? Are the ornaments. Number 3, if she does something to her face, we said she could reveal her face, right? If she does something to her face or to her hands that beautifies the hands or the face, like wearing makeup or wearing nail polish, then that also has to be concealed from the sight of the non-mahram man. So one might ask, is a lady allowed to wear makeup? Yes, she's allowed, but she can't reveal her face as it has makeup in the presence of non-mahram men. So if she's wearing makeup and she's going, let's say, to a mawlid, she's going to a celebration, she's going to the Husainiyah to celebrate the birth anniversary of Imam al-Mahdi Ajallah Ta'ala Farajahu al-Sharif, and only women will be present in the Husainiyah. So she wants to put makeup on her face. Is she allowed? Yes, she is. But on her way to the Husainiyah, she has a problem. She's gonna walk on the street. She's gonna go out of her house. Even if she doesn't walk, even if she uses a car, for example, she's going to be outside the house. So any non-mahram man might see her, which means that during that journey, she has to have her face covered so that the non-mahram men do not see the beautified face. واضح? The same applies to the wedding. Usually, the bride on the wedding night does have makeup. Jayyid. Is she allowed to have makeup on her face? Yes. But when she leaves her house, when she's in the presence of non-mahram man, or she's in a setting where a non-mahram man might see her, the face has to be covered. She needs to cover it somehow with a abaya, with a face cover, and she needs to cover it. She decides what she will use to cover the face. So that's the third type of zina that should be concealed: the beautified face and the beautified hands. Right? Again, there are different ways through which women might beautify those specific parts of their body, the hands and the face. I gave an example of makeup and nail polish. So that has to be concealed as well from the sight of non-mahram men. The fourth type of zina is the beautified clothes. Right? The beautified clothes. Sometimes she's wearing a abaya, a simple abaya. That's fine. That is a-okay. It's perfect, actually. Sometimes no. She's wearing fancy clothing that's quite attractive or, say, beautified. That case, no. She has to conceal it. And usually on the wedding night, as we said, not only the bride is wearing beautified clothing, but everyone's wearing beautified clothing, right? Men and women, those who attend the wedding, they come to the wedding with fancy, nice, beautified clothing. That being said, the women who are leaving their houses, not only the bride, the women in general, who are leaving their houses with beautified clothing, they need to cover that clothing. They need to cover their garments when they're in a setting where non-mahram men might see them. So, if, for example, a lady is invited to a wedding and she's going from her house to, let's say, the hall or to the Husainiyah, and they're celebrating the wedding in the Husainiyah. So on her way to the hall or to the place where the wedding is taking place, she might be seen by non-mahram men. So she has to cover that beautified clothing, that beautified garment. How does she cover it? Again, she could use a abaya. I know certain sisters, Jayid, that do this. They wear abaya when they have beautified clothing. And then when they arrive to the setting or the place where only women are present and non-mahram men cannot see them, they take off the abaya and then they reveal the beautified clothing. So those are what? Those are 4 forms of zina that ladies are supposed to conceal from the sight of non-mahram men. So when we say zina has to be concealed, we're talking about what? All of these 4. عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. جيد؟ Is that clear, inshallah? تمام? Again, what led us to this important topic was that Rasulullah told his wives, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, to prepare Sayyidah Zahra alayha salam for her wedding. جيد? And then finally, we mentioned in the last lesson, we mentioned what took place when Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam sought Sayyidah Fatima's hand. When he sought Sayyidah Fatima's hand for marriage, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa went to Sayyidah Fatima and conveyed the message. We read a part of the lengthy tradition where Imam alayhi salam describes what happens, or what happened, sorry. And the tradition said when the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa told Sayyidah Zahra alayhi salam about this, for the first time, Sayyidah Zahra's face did not change in a way the Prophet could tell that she did not want to marry the man who was seeking her hand. Previously, when he would tell her, Ya Zahra, Ya Fatima, Fulan, for example, sought your hand in marriage, the facial expression of Sayyidah Zahra, her face would change, and her facial expression would indicate that she did not want that individual. But for the first time, when he spoke to her about Imam Ali alayhi salam, for the first time, her face did not change. As in, she was pleased. And the Sayyidah Zahra alayhi salam, we said, remained silent. So the Prophet said what? Sukutuha iqraruha. Her silence is her approval. Her silence was her approval. And we said previously that Sayyidah Zahra alayhi salam knew from day one that Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam would be her husband. From the day she was born, she said, I testify that my husband is the master of the successors. Today, inshallah, we want to focus on 2 main points. Number 1, how do we make our weddings lawful? And number 2, we want to shed light on the sermon that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa delivered before the wedding. So when he made a declaration, when he declared to the Muslimin that he married Ali to Fatima salawatullah alayhima, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa delivered a sermon. And the declaration was part of that sermon. So we want to look at part of the sermon of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam as well. First of all, we'll start with the first point, which is a very important point. How do we make our weddings lawful? If you remember, we said one main problem we're going through, and when I say we, I'm talking about the Shia communities, is that many weddings that take place within our communities are unlawful. They consist of something that is haram, something that displeases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One might say, is it even lawful to have a wedding? Of course, it is lawful. And it's even mustahab, it's recommended. But we should avoid doing what is haram, what is unlawful in the wedding. So if we get rid of, the unlawful practices in weddings, all of our weddings will become what? Halal. They'll become lawful. The problem is many people insist on doing what displeases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we want to see, how can I have a lawful wedding? What should be done? Well, let's look at the main forms of disobedience that take place in a wedding. If we get rid of those, what's going to happen? The wedding will be a-okay. It will be lawful. So let's write a few points down, and then we'll continue, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's write down unlawful deeds done in weddings. Number one, in many weddings you have unlawful mixing between men and women. This doesn't apply to all weddings, but it does apply to a good amount of weddings that take place. You'll have unlawful mixing. So the men are present, the women are present, they're all in the same hall. The men can see the women can see the men. The women reveal their zina in front of the men. No one cares. The men also might gaze at the women. So that's a problem. That is problematic. So yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, even if it's dedicated only to the family members, right? By family, we're talking about the bigger family, right? Like, for example, the cousins, the uncles, and whatnot. Yes or no? Yeah. So in that case, it would be unlawful. Why? Because cousins are unlawful to one another. A cousin is a non-mahram, واضح? To his or her cousin. They can marry each other in the future. Tamam? So when we have, weddings where only family members attend. Yes, go ahead. Okay. Okay. So it's in the same room, but not on the same table. صحيح? Well, if it all depends on what happens. جيد. So if مثلا men and women are attending the wedding, they're in the same hall, okay? But everyone is observing the external and or internal hijab that they should observe, then that would be okay. But it would be makruh, it would be disliked. However, I'm not going to lie to you. In many cases, if not most cases, this does not happen. When you have men and women attending a wedding, there is something haram taking place because of the mixing. Makes sense? So, yes, theoretically, we can say that, okay, if we have a mixed wedding and everyone is guarding his or her limits. Everyone is observing the external and internal hijab. Jayyid? And in that case, no one is doing haram. Sahih. But on a practical level, does that even happen? That's the question. On a practical level, does that even happen? We said in the introduction, or in the first part of the class, that on the wedding night, everyone reveals what? Their beauty. Jayyid. Men come to the wedding with fancy clothing, and women also come to the wedding with what? With fancy clothing, beautified clothing, with makeup, with perfume. واضح? So, yes, theoretically speaking, if, again, there's a big line under the if the men who are present and the women who are present are all observing hijab, the internal and external hijab that they're supposed to observe, jayyid, they're all guarding their limits, then in that case, that form of mixing would be makruh. It would be disliked, but it wouldn't be haram. Because we're supposing that everyone is what? Everyone is fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and no one is crossing his or her limits. But on a practical level, usually that doesn't happen. So we can't fool ourselves. واضح? On a practical level, usually that doesn't happen. It's difficult to have that on the wedding night. Because of the atmosphere, maybe because everyone is happy, and also, as we said, because everyone, men and women, reveal their beauty on that night. They come with beautified clothing, alaykum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, fancy clothing and whatnot. واضح? Makes sense? So yeah, with the family, the issue is that you will still have non-mahram men present, even if all of the attendants are related to each other. Make sense? Yeah. So if we want to get rid of this, what are we supposed to do? Have the women in one hall and the men in a separate hall. Jayyid? That makes things much easier. And as we said previously, when the women are leaving their homes and going to the hall or going to the center, going to the Husainiya, whatever, going to the place where the wedding is taking place, they have to conceal their zina, because when they're on the way to that hall or to that Husainiya, they might be seen by non-mahram men. واضح? So to get rid of this, the simple thing to do is have two halls or two places, one designated for the men and one designated for the women. There should be segregation between men and women. And we said, if you remember, a few weeks back, that Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they stressed on segregation. They stressed on having, a partition or a curtain between the men and the women. For example, I'll give you a short example, other than the example we used regarding Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi and his women, when he was speaking to Imam Ali, and he told his wives, who is here, right? We said the question of Rasulullah indicates that his women were behind a curtain or behind some sort of barrier, or else why would he say who is here, right? Sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. Take the example of Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. Imam al-Rida, during Muharram, when Da'bil al-Khuza'i enters upon him and he tells Da'bil to recite poetry for Imam al-Hussain, to mourn Aba Abdullah al-Hussain alayhi salam, and Da'bil answers the request of Imam al-Rida. Before he begins with his recitation, what does the Imam do alayhi salam? He brings his women, but he doesn't make the women sit in front of the men. No, there's a curtain or a partition, most likely a curtain, that's placed between the men and the women. واضح? Another example, Sayyidah Zahra salamullah alayha, when she delivered her Fadakiyya sermon, right? She didn't do it the same way we, for example, male speakers, sit on a pulpit or stand on a pulpit and speak to the audience. Zahra alayha salam, She delivered a sermon. The men heard her, but she was sitting behind a curtain. So they weren't seeing Sayyidah Fatima alayha salatu wassalam. With the immense or intensive hijab that she had, salamullah alayha, she delivered the sermon from behind a curtain. واضح? So to get rid of this problem, the solution is very simple. Have the women in one hall and the men in a separate hall. Done deal. All right? So if we do that, or our weddings halal? Not yet. Not yet. We still have a few other problems that we need to take care of. Number 2. We have unlawful music and or songs that are played in the wedding. جيد? You know, during these kinds of celebrations or ceremonies, people want to hear something they enjoy, something that makes them happy. So in many weddings, you'll hear either unlawful music or songs, what we call ghina, or both. And that's a problem. جيد? Does anyone remember Sayyid Sistani's definition of unlawful music? Abdullah? Music that's suitable for amusement and entertainment gatherings. Ahsan. جيد? Music that suits entertainment and amusement gatherings is unlawful. As for the music that does not suit such gatherings, according to Agha Sistani, Sayyid Sistani Rahmatullah, it is lawful. But even then, imagine this, even then, Sayyid Sistani says, based on recommended precautions, such music should be avoided. We're talking about the lawful music, okay? So when we're talking about amusement and entertainment gatherings, we're talking about unlawful amusement and entertainment gatherings like concerts, proms, dances, nightclubs, bars, etc. جيد? The gatherings that happen in such settings or such places. واضح? So the music that suits those kinds of settings is unlawful. واضح? Disco clubs, nightclubs, again, concerts, proms. The music that suits such gatherings or such settings is unlawful. As for songs, what kind of songs are unlawful? Does anyone know? What kind of songs are unlawful?
Maulid songs?
No, I'm asking about the unlawful ones.
Oh, okay. Same thing, like the bars, the disco, all those songs that has makes you want to dance.
جيد. What if the song does not make me want to dance? Yes. Okay. My question was a trick question. All kinds of songs are haram. There is no halal song. Jade, when we say song, ghina, or singing, all forms of singing, all forms of songs are unlawful. So with songs, it's different than music. Sayyid Sistani, when he says you have two types of music, unlawful music and lawful music, he's talking about the beat, meaning the musical melody, period. He's not talking about the song where you have the voice of a human. When you have a song, khalas. The song is what? Unlawful. Jayid? Afwan? The definition of the song? I didn't present the definition. I'll tell you at the end of the class. So all songs are haram. All forms of singing are haram. You have two components. The tune, so you have singing tunes, and then you have the words. The words are, Sayyid Sani calls them kalam lahwi, meaning words of amusement. So if the words are not with the music, you mean? There's no music? So long that there's a melody, yes, it would still be haram. So with some songs, you have music, as you said. Those songs are haram for sure. Sometimes you might have a singer, he's singing, but there is no music. In that case, it's also haram. Okay? Yes, Habibi. Classical music? What I can tell you is some forms of classical music are halal. Some forms. Can't say all, but some are. Because they fit under the lawful music category. You have to understand Sayyid Sistani's definition, and then you have to make the judgment based on what? Based on urf, meaning based on what the general public sees. واضح? So you'd have to make the judgment based on what the general public sees. So again, all songs are unlawful. جيد. So if we want to get rid of this problem, again, the solution is very simple. Don't play unlawful songs. Don't play, unlawful music, and don't play any songs. Here, people might say, okay, so what are we supposed to hear in a wedding? Basim al-Karbala'i, Majlis Aza, right? You want to make us cry on the wedding night? Okay, we're not saying that. Wallahi, we're not saying that. You can listen to lawful music, according to Sayyid Sistani, like certain forms of classical music, but that's not what we recommend. That's not what we recommend. This is if you're a follower of Sayyid Sistani. Even then, we said, Sayyid Sistani says, based on recommended precaution, avoid lawful music. You can listen to mawalid. Mawalid would be much better, as long as the tunes of those mawalid are halal. Why? Because number one, you'll enjoy the mawlid. And most importantly, the mawlid contains the dhikr, Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam. When you have a mawlid, the reciter recites a poem about who? Not about Qais and Layla. Not about, Romeo and Juliet. About Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. Amir al-Mu'mineen, al-Zahra, Ahl al-Bayt. When Ahl al-Bayt are being mentioned, who's being mentioned? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because they're the vicegerents of God. They're Allah's representatives. Salamullahi alayhim. So what would be better than having, lawful music? Again, I said we don't recommend that. What would be better is to have a mawlid. Let the reciter recite something in honor of Al-Hasan bin Ali, Al-Hussain bin Ali, Imam al-Rida. That way, you'll bless the wedding, because Ahl al-Bayt are being mentioned. And when Ahl al-Bayt are mentioned, who attends? Shaitan al-Rajim? No. The angels alayhim as-salam attend. So angels will attend your wedding when Ahlul Bayt salamullah alayhim are mentioned. واضح?
Sayyid,
who had a comment? Abdullah, yes. You might find, yes, other maraja saying that definitely there are maraja other than Sayyid Sistani Madhullo who also believe some forms of music are halal. But again, by music, we're not talking about songs. We're talking about a mere musical beat. That's it. جيد? So you do have other maraja, like Sayyid al-Khu'i Quddisa Sirruh, who believed there are forms of halal music. Okay? Yes. But then again, you might find some marja out there who's very strict with music, to the point he tells you that all forms of music are haram. Maybe you might find a marja like that. Jayid. This is why regarding jurisprudence, it's very important to know the laws, the verdict of your marja. Jayid. So this problem over here can be solved again simply by replacing the unlawful music, replacing the songs with mawalid about Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. Again, provided that the lahan, meaning the tune, the melody, is lawful. Jayyid. Sometimes a reciter, might use an unlawful melody. So he'll use, for example, a singing melody or a singing tune to recite words about Allah or about Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. Jayyid. That's not correct. That is unlawful according to Sayyid al-Sistani Damadullah. You might even find certain singers, Jayyid, singers, who, they supposedly sing about Allah or about Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam to attract the Muslims to Allah and Ahl al-Bayt. This is wrong. Why? Because we say, لا يطاع الله من حيث يعصى. I can't obey Allah by disobeying Him. Allah told me you can't take that route. You want to call to my path? All right, call to my path by what? By giving lectures, by writing poetry. That's fine. Poetry is okay. By saying poetry, that's fine. But when you come and sing about Allah or Ahl al-Bayt, and you tell yourself, you know what, I want to attract the youth, I want to attract the Muslims through my songs, that's incorrect. You're trying to obey God by disobeying Him, and that does not work. Yes, Habibi. They do mention military music as halal music. Yeah, Sayyid Stani says military music is halal. Yeah, it's called in Arabic al-musiqa al-askariya. Yeah. But again, we have to understand the general principle, which is if the music suits entertainment and amusement gatherings, it's haram. واضح? جيد? So this is a second problem we find in weddings.
Sheikh,
A third problem is dancing.
Sheikh, I have a question.
Oh yes, sorry about that. Go ahead.
So you're saying this singer that sings a song about Allah, Sami Yusuf, so his songs are haram?
Well, if they're actual songs, then that would be haram. So if he's using, singing melodies, then yeah, it would be unlawful according to Sayyid Sistani.
How about Lal Qaid?
Should be the same because songs are unlawful, and in general our maraja are in agreement regarding this issue. There might even be ijma, but I have to review. But the least I can say right now is that in general our maraja are in agreement that if something is a song, you can't listen to it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sheikh, I had another question.
ايه حبيبي جمال تفضل.
What instruments would be considered haram if they are in a mawlid?
For Sayyid Sistani, it's not about the instrument, it's about the melody.
Okay,
It's
thank
about
you.
so the tune, yeah. Jazakallahu khairan. So a third problem is dancing. Okay, you'll have sometimes men dance in a wedding, or women dance, or both genders will dance. That's also unlawful. That is also unlawful. You can joke in a wedding. That's fine, as long as the jokes are what proper and halal. That's fine. You can have lawful activities. Jayyid. You can eat cake. You can converse. You can have supper or dinner. In fact, it's mustahab to have a banquet in the wedding. It's one of the mustahabat, one of the recommended deeds. Jayyid. You can socialize. But dancing specifically is forbidden. It should be avoided. Sayyid al-Sistani is very strict regarding dancing. There are different how can I say this? Different scenarios regarding dancing, and Sayyid Sistani views that most of them are unlawful. So, to give you more clarity, to add clarity to this issue, which is, I believe, an important issue, he says, men are not allowed to dance in front of women, number one. Women are not allowed to dance in front of men, number two. Men are not allowed to dance in front of men, number three. And women are not allowed to dance in front of women, number four. The fourth one is really important. ليش؟ لأنه some women believe or like to believe that they can dance in front of other sisters in faith. If they're doing this in a hall or in a place where men are not present, it's allowed. For Sayyid Sistani, it's not allowed. So women dancing amongst women only, that's also not allowed. جيد?
Sheikh,
Yes.
do you know for Qaid, dancing in front of another woman is halal or haram?
لا والله, I'd have to check.
Can you please?
Inshallah.
I never knew that. I thought between women it's okay.
Yeah, I know. This thought exists within our communities. But for Agha Sistani, he says no. So women dancing in front of women is also unlawful. Hatta
Interesting.
Sayyid Sistani goes to the point of saying that a person cannot dance on his own, whether he's in front of a mirror or not, to that extent. You can't dance in general. There's only one exception, and that is a husband dancing for his wife or vice versa in seclusion, when they're alone, without the presence of unlawful music or songs. That's the only exception for Sayyid Sistani. تفضلوا شباب. اللي بدكم إياه. It's one of the haram deeds. It's like singing, مثلا. Can you sing on your own? No one's hearing you other than yourself. Can you sing? Can't. So with singing, it's haram to listen to the song, and it's haram to produce the song, to make it, to be the one who's singing. تفضل عبد الله. Yes, a bunch of these fatwa that I mentioned regarding dancing, they have ihtiyat. So Sayyid Sani says it is unlawful based on mandatory precaution. If you want to know the details, the itsy bitsy details, go to sistani.org. The Q&A section, go to Ar-Raqs. Questions about dancing, you'll find the details there. But I just wanted to mention in general that all of these forms of dancing are not allowed for Sayyid Sistani Damadullah. The only form of dancing that's allowed is a wife dancing for her husband, or vice versa, in seclusion, meaning they're not in front of other people, and without the presence of unlawful music or songs. تفضل حبيبي.
Sheikh, can a woman sing in front of a woman?
No, for Sayyid Sistani, that's also unlawful. Yeah.
Okay.
تفضل عبد الله. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sheikh Al-Fayyad? There could be a bit of difference regarding this issue between the maraja. No, his question is a valid question. Adi. That's fine. Yeah. There could be, Abdullah, some differences in these issues. Jayed. So to be specific, I wanted to mention Sayyid Sistani's fatawa. Jayed. But we can't forget one point, and that is sometimes the marja, okay? Sometimes the marja will mention that a specific deed is allowed, but with conditions, provided that the conditions are fulfilled. And sometimes the conditions cannot be fulfilled. Okay, so keep that in mind. تفضل حبيبي. ذكرني باسمك حبيبي. يوسف. تفضل. Rhyming in itself, no, it's not haram. This is called saja in Arabic. And Ahl al-Bayt used to do it. Even in the Quran al-Karim, in many cases, the verses rhyme. Sometimes they don't, but in many cases they do. So Mere rhyming is okay. But if it turns into a song, that's different. Okay? مثلا الزهراء عليها السلام in الخطبة الفدكية. Listen to the words. الحمد لله على ما أنعم وله الشكر على ما ألهم والثناء بما قدم. It's rhyming, right? من عموم نعم ابتداها وسبوغ آلاء أسداها وتمام منن والاها. There's a rhyme. تمام? So rhyming in itself is okay. It's called saja. That's fine. Rhythm? Rhythm is a bit different, صح? It's when you have a specific pattern or no? Yeah. Even having a rhythm in your words, that in itself is not haram, right? Unless you're thinking of a different meaning for rhythm. For example, when we come to poetry, Arabic poetry, there's a specific way of how the poem flows. جيد? We call it wazn in Arabic. So there's a flow for the poem. And if that flow is broken, that would be a mistake, a mistake pertaining to poetry. واضح? So that also is okay. You have to remember one thing. Poetry is fine. So you can be a poet, you can write poetry, you can write poetry in Arabic, in English, in Persian, any language. Poetry is okay. As long as you're not conveying improper messages that destroy mankind or mislead them through your poetry. So if you want to write a poem about, let's say, respecting parents, or a poem about morals and upholding good morals, that's fine. Better than that would be what? Writing a poem about Ahl al-Bayt, alayhim salam, about their virtues or their tragedies, or about their teachings, or taking a story pertaining to Ahl al-Bayt and then rewriting that story in a poem. And that's what several poets did. They would look at certain incidents, and then they would basically summarize that incident through poetry. Hassan ibn Thabit, the Prophet's poet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would do that. On the day of Khandaq, he recited a poem about what happened and how Imam alayhi salam slew Amr ibn Abd Wud. On the day of Ghadir, he recited a poem about Ghadir, summarizing the event of Ghadir. So yeah, that would be even nicer to have poetry about Al Muhammad alayhi salam. Yeah. Okay. Right. Now, regarding this sin specifically, how do we remove it? Very simple. Just don't dance. Jayid. Do other activities. There are many activities, many lawful activities that a person can perform. You don't have to dance to enjoy the wedding. You can do other things. Last but not least, a fourth problem we see in some weddings, not all, is the presence of unlawful food or drinks. Unlawful food or drinks. So in some weddings, you'll have, unfortunately, alcohol being served, wine being served, whiskey, a'udhu billah, jayid. That's a very big problem. Or you'll have unlawful food, jayid. Getting rid of this problem is very simple. Just replace the unlawful food with what? With lawful food, jayid. Instead of having unlawful drinks like alcohol, have lawful drinks like tea, coffee, cappuccino, juices, so on and so forth. They say, الشاي خمر المؤمنين, right? Tea is the wine of the believers. They call it like that. They give it that title. So anyhow, this problem here is not too difficult. In fact, all of them are not too difficult to remove. It only requires what? It requires dedication, and it requires a strong will. When I know that my religion tells me that these things are unlawful and have to be avoided, whether I'm in a wedding or not. But at the same time, my religion allows me to do thousands of deeds. Why should I, stick to these deeds? Allah Ta'ala has allowed me to do thousands of other deeds. So I'll enjoy my wedding, I'll have fun, I'll laugh, sure, but in a lawful manner. The problem is when we, say these things, people will object and will say, you know what, you're turning our weddings into majalis aza, into majalis latam. It's all about crying, right? That's not the case. Wallahi, that's not the case. You're allowed to be happy in Islam. Being happy is not unlawful. Hence, Imam Sadiq says, alayhi salam, when he speaks about the Shi'as, يَفْرَحُونَ لِفَرَحِنَا. They rejoice when we rejoice. وَيَحْزَنُونَ لِحُزْنِنَا. And they feel sadness when we are sad. Jayyid? So being happy is not unlawful. In fact, instilling happiness in the heart of the believer is one of the best deeds you could do. But be happy, rejoice in a way that pleases God subhanahu wa ta'ala, not in a way that displeases Allah. And as we said, there are many options. The problem is the human being wants to stick to these. Yeah, look at other options. Allah Azza wa Jal made Islam a religion of what? Not only haram, but a religion of halal and haram. Tahleel wa tahreem. He tells you a bunch of deeds are unlawful. Then again, a lot of deeds are what? Lawful. And I want you to remember the following point. The deeds that are lawful exceed the unlawful deeds in number. If I were to ask you, how many unlawful deeds are there in Islam? How many muharramat do we have? Things that we should avoid. Give me a number, just any random number. 1,000? Any other number? Not a million? No, not a million, no. It doesn't get to that point.
10,000?
10,000? Hatta, I don't think it gets to that point. Your number is quite accurate, Abdullah. Or close to being accurate. Got it? Maybe 1,000, maybe 700, say 2,000, whatever the number may be. Jayyid. The deeds that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows exceed the unlawful deeds in number. So if you have, let's say, 700 muharramat, you have maybe 10,000 or 100,000 mubahat. 10,000 or 100,000 deeds that are lawful, that are okay. واضح? So instead of sticking to these deeds, let's, enjoy our weddings, have fun, but in a way that pleases the Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, Habibi. Instruments? If you're going to bring instruments, most likely you're going to have unlawful music. Most likely, but again, it depends on the type of music that's being played. Yes, I'll be honest with you. The presence of instruments in a wedding doesn't properly fit our Islamic identity. Doesn't properly fit our Islamic identity. The least I can say is that this applies to most instruments, if not all. Jayyid. So again, regarding, regarding things that you could hear, it would be best to have mawalid or halal anashid in the wedding. We highly emphasize on mawalid because there's remembrance of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam in the mawlid. So it will bless the gathering. SubhanAllah, I ran out of time. We're not going to have enough time to look at the second point for today, so we'll leave it for next week, inshallah, if we're still alive. I wanted to mention this point, with emphasis and also with clarity, because unfortunately, it has become a problem. It has become a problem. many weddings that we have, or most of them, are unlawful, and we should do something about it. Our weddings should be halal, should be lawful. والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على المصطفى محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وأجل فرجهم يا كريم.